Good evening, I'm Steve Seitz, and you're watching Book Talk. This is the first show of 2015, and I'm pleased to introduce my guest. Her name is ReJoyce. She is a lay counselor for domestic abuse victims, and she comes at it through a different way than most. Why don't you explain a little bit to us about who you are and how you became to be a domestic abuse counselor?
Okay. I grew up in a Christian home and have been involved in Christian circles since before I was born. I married a man back in 1987 who also claimed to be a Christian and grew up in the Christian church. Many years later, I found that I was in a domestic abuse situation. The abuse started almost immediately, but I didn't recognize it because it's something that's not talked about in a lot of churches. In the, I want to say the Baptist flavor, but I've also found in my counseling after I got out of my situation that it is all religions, that there are a lot of gaps, that people just don't understand what domestic abuse is and how prevalent and how relevant the scriptures are for counseling people who are in those situations or are coming out of those situations.
May I ask how bad your situation was? Was this physical? Was this emotional?
There are several different types of abuse, and I had everything from sexual abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, coercion, threatening, intimidation, isolation, economic abuse, and physical abuse in the sense that he was cornered me. God was very gracious into me that I never had a fist land on my nose, but I had that fist within inches of my nose and the threats happening. So God protected me a little bit in that, but I certainly have experienced all of those types of abuse.
Basically a state of abject terror day in and day out.
Yes, it's always walking on eggshells, wondering what the situation is going to be in any given day, and wondering when he comes in the door what his mood is going to be and what that attitude is going to be and what I'm going to try to do to assuage his anger and kind of get through that situation for that moment.
Did you have children?
Yes, we have 3 children. They're all grown adults now.
Did this extend to them, or were you basically the buffer between your husband and your children?
The abuse was basically aimed at me, but the children were the pawns that he would use to get at me. So he would manipulate me by using them or withholding them from me in order to get me to do whatever it was he wanted in that particular situation.
I've been in something similar myself, actually. My first wife was a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic. This is 30 years ago. And ordinarily I'd ask you the same question I'd ask anybody else: why didn't you leave? But when your wife is sick, you really can't, because what was I supposed to do? You know,
right.
What are you supposed to do? You can't kick her out in the street. And we had a son, and he certainly didn't want to see him, have him see me, do anything cruel to his mother. And so I just stayed until she finally up and left on her own accord. So,
and that's a question that I often get, is when people don't understand domestic abuse, is, well, why didn't you just leave? And each situation is different, and there are times when it's safe to leave. There are times when it's not safe to leave. There are situations that cause you to stay, and a big part of that is just not necessarily understanding what's really happening and really wanting the best for that person who is abusing you and wanting them to change. Because there is a deep love that's there for that person, and you recognize that the situation's not right, but part of the abuse is they're always making promises to change and trying to convince you that their abuse of you is your fault, not their own. So there's a lot of things that are related with that, and only the person who's in that abusive situation can really make that final decision as far as when they can get out safely and when they're able to actually stay out of that situation and begin the healing process.
how did you come to get out of it? When was the tipping point?
The tipping point for me was actually kind of twofold. I discovered that he had had a pornography habit, which I didn't know about, that was very pervasive and extensive. And that, coupled with needing some physical changes. I needed to have surgery, and he was not allowing me to have the surgery that was recommended by my physician. So in order to have the surgery, I needed to actually leave physically, according to doctor's orders, to be in a safe place for me to have the surgery and to be able to heal. So it was in getting out and the combination of identifying his pornography habit, those coupled together caused me to have to make that break. And at that point, once I was out, there was no way I could get back in safely. I have a picture of a padlock that my husband put on the front door. It's a combination padlock, and it's a true picture of an abusive situation, because that padlock represents the abuser, and the abuse victim is either padlocked inside that house in the abusive situation, or they're padlocked out until they kowtow to the abuser and agree to go back into that locked house.
Yeah.
And so that's just a strong picture of that, and it's a combination padlock. It's not one with a key. It's a combination that only is known to that abuser. And in an abusive situation, the abuser is the one that always is changing that combination as far as what is going to be safe right now and what you are required to do. And so that's kind of where I am. That padlock went out and was put onto my house when I was recovering from my surgery. So that was a clear indication to me that this is the time to stay out and start working on the other aspects.
How did you keep yourself safe after you left?
I was very fortunate that I was taken in by my parents, and so I had a safe place, and I had people that were around me that were able to be that buffer for me. And then I had that 911 programmed into my phone, and I was no longer afraid to use that.
No.
So, yeah.
So didn't you say, I think I read somewhere on one of your, I'm thinking on your site, that you met this man at a Christian function?
I did. I met him at a Christian singles retreat at a Christian camp. I did. And when we were married, we continued to go to church, and we were involved in the church. Our children were involved in church activities. I tried to go to the church to get help when I was trying to escape, and there was not help in the churches in the area.
That is amazing to me.
It was amazing to me as well.
Because, of course, sanctuary is supposed to be part of the function of the Christian church.
Yes, that's correct. But it was not available to me.
Yeah, I find that astounding.
I still find that astounding, especially since the statistics show that 1 in 4 women in the U.S. is either in an abusive situation or has been in an abusive situation. That's in the whole country as a whole. If you look at just Christian spheres, then that statistic is now 1 in 5 women in the churches is either in an abusive relationship or has been in an abusive relationship.
Why do you think that is? What makes the church, basically so kind to predators?
Because the only thing that a predator needs to have for support is for people to do nothing. As long as people do nothing to help the victim, then the abuser is able to continue his habits.
I see.
So in order for a church or a layman, anyone to help an abuse victim, they actually have to stand up and say, no, the abuse has to stop, and I'm going to help this victim.
I see. I think I told you about a friend of mine from this area who fell into the exact same trap you did. She left. She left her business behind, moved to Texas to be with this guy, and 6 months later she was back. And I swear she'd aged 20 years in that time. And she told me just about everything you've been telling me.
Yes. It's stereotypical things. All abusers do the same things. I've said when I do some of my speaking engagements, often it seems like the abusers read a manual on how to do this, because no matter who I talked with, they've got the same things that are happening to them. Maybe the situation is just tweaked a little bit and a little bit different, but the abuser's attitudes and behaviors are ditto. They just follow through. They're always the same. It's amazing.
So who comes to you for help?
Who comes to me for help? People who come along the way, whom I meet in my regular travels. I also go out and do speaking engagements in churches or wherever I can get into a group of people who want to either hear how to help abuse victims or for situations where there are abusers, like counseling services for domestic abuse, pregnancy care centers, church Sunday schools, those types of situations. And so it's people that I meet along the way on those ways, mostly, that I work with. But it's also just people that I come across in everyday life when I start telling my story. And they will say, well, what about this, or what about that? So whoever I meet, if I can help them, I try to do that.
You must have heard some outlandish things in all this time. What are some of the more memorable cases that have come to you?
I'm working in a situation right now where a young woman, about the age of my daughter, grew up in an abusive house where her father was abusive toward her. She went to college and she was raped by one of her professors.
Yeah.
And so she is now in a safe place that's kind of out, and she's working on healing. But it's a daily situation where you have to just be open, lend them an ear, lend them encouragement, to show them and to encourage them that they are special and they do have worth. They have talents, and they can be encouraged to do whatever it is that their heart is desiring for them to do. And it's just that repeated encouragement over and over to help them to move past that situation.
Do you bring faith into it all the time, some of the time, when appropriate?
I bring it in when it's appropriate. There are some times when people don't want to hear that. Most of the places I have been at this point has been in church situations or functions that are somehow connected with the church, because the churches are trying to open up a ministry to these women. And because my book does hold a lot of scripture, and that's where I come from, that kind of works its way in there. But I work in as much as is needed in that situation for where that person is at. I don't try to force my beliefs on them, because that's not where we need to be. Each person has their own thoughts and their own needs at different places in their lives, and that's where I try to meet, is where they're at.
Have you ever had to deal with some of their husbands?
No, I haven't. I have not been in that situation at this point.
Oh, good. Well, I hope you never have to.
I hope I never have to as well, but yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the books.
Okay, the book is available.
You can hold it up.
Okay. The book is Who Am I? And it's scriptural encouragement for survivors of domestic abuse. And in the book, you'll find a little bit of my story in there. And then each chapter is kind of broken down by the different areas of abuse that the survivors need to kind of break out of and move past and figure out how to come to grips with that and to heal from that. So within those chapters, I have scripture that is also the encouragement that goes along with that. So that in my healing journey, I found that I would find scriptures that helped me in a situation, and then I would kind of lapse back and need to go back and find those scriptures again. So I would have to go through journal after journal to find where it was at that point in time. So here I have it kind of in a handbook where if you're dealing with forgiveness or anger or loneliness, then those topics are in there, and you can go to the scriptures that will encourage you and hear my story or one of my stories in that period of time. I also have a companion journal that goes with it, and this is just a blank page for you to write on, to put your feelings down, so that as you heal, this process helps to work through those situations. So you can have your individual thoughts with that you can tailor to what your needs are at that given time.
Just to get slightly off, do people find that helpful, writing it down?
Absolutely. People do find it helpful, and I have some people who have gotten my book and are working their way through, and I encourage people to journal in the book. I often say that put your thoughts down in a journal on this, because it's very therapeutical to be able to do that. Some people like to write physically, and those are the ones that get the journal, but I have some other people who are doing it digitally, and they have a Word document that they keep plugging away into, and they'll date it and keep track of that way. But it is very helpful to journal that. Yes. So.
And you also brought a little bit about your PowerPoint.
Yes, I do speaking engagements, and I actually have, if you go to my website, then you can get information on that, and the website is rejoyce.tateauthor.com, and that's ReJoyce.tateauthor.com. Tate, TATEAUTHOR.com. And in there you can find more information about my book. You can find information about domestic abuse and the ways to identify that, and the cycle of abuse that all abuse victims kind of are in, and a little bit about how that works. But also you can get information on the speaking engagements that I can do, and it'll show the different topics inside. Breaking the Holy Hush is geared toward churches and helping the churches to be able to know how to help these people so that they can have a ministry to there, and also just opening their eyes to how much abuse is happening in the churches. Is it in my church? I also have a PowerPoint that I gear specifically for victims of abuse, where I try to encourage them and uplift them. And I use analogies of lace and butterflies to help to encourage them to show that they are beautiful and they are loved and they are special and they do have a purpose in life. I also have spoken in a high school and a college, and I spoke on Dating 101, How to Spot Mr. Wrong. And in this topic, I actually go through and I will explain to my audience how you can identify an abusive situation, either that you're in and how to get out of it, or to actually kind of see that before you get hard and fast into that relationship. Because there are warning signs that you can watch for that say, hey, if I continue this, chances are that I'm going to end up in a domestic abuse situation.
What might some of the signs be? What should women look for?
They should look for things that are making you feel uncomfortable